if all we can know about the current moment is from the past, if those relationships are changing, then our information is not going to help us navigate uncertainty into the future. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are so often blindsided by things that are unexpected, because we're applying the lessons of the past to a moment that is profoundly different from anything that has happened before in terms of social dynamics in the history of our species.
How do we define the research model of social change?
When we think about social change and change in general, we have been drawn to very, very simple explanations. And it's because those are really comforting. They make sense to us. But the world is far more complex than it's ever been. And so those assumptions are falling apart, and the research we do doesn't fit the standard of the dynamics of the modern world. And one of the first assumptions that we start with is this idea that when you look at why something happens, that there's going to be a clear-cut cause behind it. And of course, sometimes this is true. If we think about why people are developing cancer, for example, yes, smoking is correlated with cancer, and it is one of the main causes of lung cancer. But there's a lot of stuff that unfolds in the world that doesn't have a clear-cut cause. It has an infinite number of patterns that had to occur in exactly the right way for that moment to unfold as it was. So for example, you think about the atomic bomb being dropped on Japan. If all sorts of things had been slightly different, this would not have played out the same way. So if the Battle of Midway had not happened, or if Albert Einstein had not been born, or if uranium deposits had not been forged by geological forces, all of these things had to exist just as they were for that event to happen on exactly August 6, 1945. And yet our models don't do well in trying to understand an infinite number of causes producing a single effect. Now, the second assumption that we have, which complex systems theory challenges and tells us is wrong, is that if you just understand the components of an individual system, you will therefore understand the entire system. And the reason that's incorrect is because complex systems are different from what are called complicated systems. It sounds like a very small nuance, but it's a very important one. So a Swiss watch, for example, is complicated but not complex. And the reason it's complicated is because it has a million interlocking parts. It's got all these little things in it that need to work for the watch to actually perform its function. But it doesn't adapt within this system if something breaks. So if part of the watch breaks down, the watch just stops working. A complex system is different. It's adaptive. So if one part of something changes, something else might shift in the system as well. And we can imagine this in our own lives, because if you're in traffic, for example, if somebody pumps the brakes, it's not like everybody just keeps going and slams into them. They also pump the brakes, and it affects the entire system. So this adaptation that we have in a complex system means that you can't just understand the constituent parts. You have to understand exactly how they interact with each other. And most models of social change are not good at that. So it causes us to misunderstand the world. The third big assumption, and this is something that's totally central to social science and a lot of understandings of change in the past, is that if something was a pattern of cause and effect in the past, it will also be a pattern of cause and effect in the present or in the future. And the philosopher David Hume identified this problem many hundreds of years ago and highlighted it, but we've just sort of ignored it because it's very difficult to overcome. Now, the problem is that the world is more rapidly changing than ever before. So that means that this problem is particularly acute right now because the patterns of the past are least likely to apply to our current moment or to the future. And of course, we understand this with things like climate change, where you look at models of weather and someone will say, oh, it's a 100-year flood. You say, well, hold on. The 100-year flood is happening every 3 years now. Well, that's because the pattern of the past no longer fits the pattern of the present. The underlying system has changed. And this is one of those really strange dynamics of social research that I think is difficult to wrap your head around, but is a very important question for understanding the world. So for example, there's an analysis of authoritarian regimes and how they work and why they're so stable. And this analysis says that Middle Eastern regimes are extremely resilient. They're extremely stable. And then about a year or two after this book was published, the Arab Spring happens and all these regimes collapse in the span of like 3 months. Now, the immediate reaction is to think this theory was wrong. It was disproven by the fact that they said they were stable and then they broke apart. But the second way of thinking about the world is that the world actually changed from the point that the book was written to the point when the regimes collapsed. And it sounds like a small nuance, but it's actually a very profound idea. It's saying that when they were writing the book, they were right. The world worked this way. The regimes were resilient. Then something happened and the world changed. And now the theory is incorrect, but not because it was wrong in the past, but because simply the world has shifted. And this is a really, really important idea to wrap your head around, because so much of modern life runs on models that assume that past patterns are predictive of future ones. AI is also like this, right? Where AI is learning based on past patterns and then trying to develop, machine learning driven models that can help us navigate uncertainty in the future. But if the underlying world has shifted, then that analysis is not going to just be wrong, it's going to be dangerous, because it will lead you astray to thinking that this is the way the world works, when in fact the world is now profoundly different. And the problem is we can't really test this. We can't know when the world has shifted, because the only way we make sense of cause and effect is by looking at what happened in the past. And this is the point that Hume made. He says, look, if all we can know about the current moment is from the past, if those relationships are changing, then our information is not going to help us navigate uncertainty into the future. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are so often blindsided by things that are unexpected, because we're applying the lessons of the past to a moment that is profoundly different from anything that has happened before in terms of social dynamics in the history of our species. So when we tried to understand why things happen in social systems or in our own lives or our own societies, the old way of thinking often involved what are called linear dynamics. Now, a linear dynamic is very easy to understand. It just means that the proportion of a cause is directly related to the outcome that occurs, right? In other words, a small cause has a small effect and a big cause has a big effect. And the relationship between them is linear. Now, the way the world actually works is nonlinear. And this means that sometimes a very small change can produce a very big effect. And complex systems theory and the sort of world of complexity science understands this and tries to incorporate it into its models. Now, one of the reasons why we used to have linear models was simply because of computing power. And this is another one of the flukes that has sort of lingered on to the way that we understand the world, is that back in the 1980s and 1990s, computers just simply couldn't grapple with complex systems. They had to have simple dynamics where a straightforward cause has a straightforward effect, and there is a linear relationship between them, which can be spit out in a neat and tidy equation. Computer models have gotten radically better in technological advancement, but the way that we think about the world hasn't really caught up to it. So a lot of models that we derive our understanding of reality from, especially in the social sciences, are still linear. And it's a huge mistake. Now, the problem, of course, is that complex systems models are trying to come up with very difficult equations to explain a very complex reality. And it's not always easy, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing where we're not going to solve every problem. There is some uncertainty that can't be tamed. But we should acknowledge that linear relationships are wrong, that almost nothing in the world actually has a very straightforward relationship between the size of the cause and the size of the effect. And so, complex systems theory, which is still a small minority of social research, I think will be the future of 21st century thinking. It's not completely new. It's been around for several decades, but it still only forms a small slice of what social research is produced. Another reason why this exists is derived from a fluke that is arbitrary, which is the way that we design our silos of knowledge in university research. We have these very strict definitions of this is a political science question, and this is an economics question, and this is a sociology question, and these people study physics and biology. A lot of people are actually thinking about change. They're not just thinking about these realms of knowledge which are totally disparate. And it's not like change happens completely differently, whether it's a meerkat versus a human. They have the same sort of aspects behind them because physics is determining the way the world works. So I think these silos between disciplines and sort of fields of knowledge are holding us back. And what complex systems theory does really, really well is it connects the dots. It brings these groups of thinkers together who are thinking about really different questions and says, hold on, let's try to see if there's any commonality in how we can understand change. And that requires nonlinear thinking. It requires the idea of modeling a world in which a tiny shift, a little split-second change of timing, or a little fluctuation that seems to be noise can actually radically shift the way that the future unfolds. And we're not there yet. We don't have a complete understanding of this, which is why our forecasts are still so often wrong. But I think this is where the action is going to be in the intellectual developments of the 21st century, is jettisoning the old ways of thinking about these systems and thinking much more about complexity. When we navigate our world, we tend to have what I call the mirage of regularity. And it's very easy to be seduced by this because the world does seem really stable. I mean, I think when we think about our daily lives, we can set the alarm at the same time every day, wake up, have roughly the same commute, go to the office. Things unfold in these highly predictable ways. And because of this, we start to think, okay, the world is controllable. The world is tameable. And we can just decide how things are going to unfold. This is, however, a mirage. And I think this is where the sandpile model and some of the other ideas from complex systems theory are so important for correcting that mirage and making us understand that it is just an illusion. The mirage of regularity is one where when you think about the 21st century, we have been able to delude ourselves into thinking we can make forecasts, right? We can say, here's how the world is going to work. But every forecast has been invalidated by these black swan events. I mean, every single economic and geopolitical forecast was invalidated by 9/11 and the financial collapse of the financial crisis. We have every single geopolitical forecast about the Middle East being invalidated by the Arab Spring. Everything that we thought about the world was invalidated by the rise of Donald Trump. I mean, how different would the world be if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016? And that was a very close race, and it could have profoundly reshaped the world. And of course, the easiest one is the pandemic. I mean, just imagine going back and reading the economic forecasts for what the 2020, what the world in 2020 would look like, written in late 2019. I mean, those forecasts were so unbelievably wrong. And I think one of the things that's worth thinking about is that we could never imagine some of these dynamics until they happen to us. So one of the arguments I make in Fluke is there are things that we call radical uncertainty, where we can't simply understand the future in any possible way because the idea doesn't even occur to us. So for example, if someone said to you, how much do you think that a person will use their phone in the year 2020? And they were asking you this question in 1995. There is absolutely no way you could forecast the answer correctly because A, phones only existed to call people on in 1995, so you couldn't imagine a smartphone. You wouldn't understand that it was possible to spend all day on your phone. And secondly, you would not know that a pandemic was about to be unleashed in which we were all stuck at home, bored, and scrolling on our devices. So the forecasts that we make are very often wrong, and yet what we do is we continue to make these assumptions under the mirage of regularity that are rarely uncertain, often wildly inaccurate. And I think the lesson we need to learn from this is that we can't tame the world, that we can't predict accurately. And so there are things that we have to separate from the questions we have to answer from the questions we don't have to answer. So for example, if you get a very strange medical disease that you don't understand, there's no diagnosis, no one knows what's going on, you still have to try to answer that question, right? You still have to say, here's what we're going to try. This is the medicine we'll give you. We hope it works. If you want to make an economic forecast about the GDP growth rate or the inflation rate of Malawi in 2035, we don't have to answer that question. And we're going to be extremely wrong. We're going to look really stupid because it's inevitably going to be inaccurate. So I think if we parcel out the parts of the world that we have to try to navigate through this uncertainty with the questions we must answer, and we separate it from the questions we don't have to answer, we'll make fools of ourselves slightly less often, and that will be a good thing for our societies.
Want to support the channel? Join the Big Think members community where you get access to videos early, ad-free.